Shockingly, U.S. food companies can use their own independent experts to bring forth a new chemical without the approval of the FDA. It is a travesty that the majority of Americans don't even know they are constantly exposed to thousands of untested ingredients that are actually banned or regulated in other countries. To put it bluntly, for the last 50 years, we have been running the largest uncontrolled science experiment ever done on humanity without their consent.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 305th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And today's episode is really about you, your food, actually, which literally becomes you. And I'm sure that you want that food to be, well, if not healthy, because we all eat junk sometimes and fried food is delicious, but I'm sure you at least want your food to not be poison. But we have a problem here in the United States when it comes to our food, and you need to know about this. And so today's episode is more important than most. But this episode's topic also has a crossover with politics at this particular moment in time, because future President Trump has been announcing who he wants confirmed as the heads of our executive branch, so law enforcement agencies. Now, just because he announces someone, that doesn't mean that person is definitely going to get the job, because many of these positions require approval of the Senate. And so we don't know for sure that any of these people are actually going to be empowered yet, but regardless, I know we all have opinions about the names that are being announced. And if you want to hear mine, you're not going to hear it on this episode. If you want to hear mine, you should subscribe to and listen to We're Not Wrong, because that's the show where I discuss current events with my friends Justin Robert Young and Andrew Heaton. And we're having a lot of fun with some of these appointees. But on Congressional Dish, I highlight what's happening in Congress. And for this episode, those two media worlds have collided, because one of Trump's appointees was in one of the hearings I'm going to play for you today. Because I watched a few hearings, and the highlights of which I'm going to share with you. But I want you to hear this, especially right before the holidays, as you're making choices about what kinds of food to feed your families. But I really wanted to watch these hearings for selfish reasons that had nothing to do with politics, because I've been on a pretty intense health kick for the past 2-3 years or so. Because as many of you know, I stopped drinking poison for fun a little over 2 years ago, which is one of the best decisions I've ever made. But that was only the start of it, because not long after that, I started using food as medicine to try to prevent any additional cancers from forming on my body. Because as long-term listeners know, I've been diagnosed with skin cancer 4 times, and I've had 4 easy surgeries over the course of 2 years to get rid of them. And I am happy to report that my scans have been clear now for 3 visits in a row, but I'm determined to do whatever I can to keep that streak going, hopefully forever. And that started with me incorporating foods that are high in antioxidants into my diet, because antioxidants are what remove the free radicals in my body that were the causes of my cancers. But once I started down this rabbit hole of skin cancer prevention, it eventually expanded into wanting to eat foods that help with all cancer prevention. Because the cancer I've already had, it's almost never deadly, and it was really easy to treat. They just cut it out of me, and that was it. But even that was expensive, scary, and a pain in the ass. And I never want to know what it's like to go through real cancer. And so now I'm that cliche of a person who stops drinking and becomes a health nut. I listen to Andrew Huberman, I read books by Peter Attia, and when there is a hearing, any kind of hearing, that's investigating or exposing issues with our food that are affecting our health, those go up to the top of my list to watch. That's just where I'm at right now with my life. And so I recently watched 2 hearings that I'm going to share the highlights from both of which with you today. Now, one of them was a legit hearing, and it took place on September 18th in the House Ways and Means Committee. But the other one was a bit different. It was a so-called roundtable that was held by Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin, on September 25th. Now, a roundtable, this isn't an official hearing, and a lot of times I don't even know about them because they're not even listed in the congressional record. The only way that I know of to find out about them is to either hear about them out in the wild or to go to every committee's website and read through their list of hearings and field hearings. But there are way too many official hearings that I want to watch, and so quite frankly, I don't need to go on those deeper dives for content. There's just too much going on in Congress, and so I don't have to do that to find interesting stories, and so I generally don't. I found out about this one in the wild. And clearly, I wasn't the only person to get the memo about this roundtable, because this roundtable was held in a large room inside of the Capitol, and it was standing room only, which is rare. And the hearing was posted on Rumble, not YouTube. And even though I think most Americans don't even know what Rumble is, it's been viewed, at least in part, over 217,000 times on Rumble. That's a lot. And I'm guessing that's because after this roundtable took place, 3 of the witnesses who participated in it were guests on the Joe Rogan Experience, because that's how I found out about it. Specifically, I found out about the roundtable when Joe Rogan had Brigham Bueller on his podcast again. Because Brigham Bueller is the founder of Ways to Well, which is a telehealth company which doesn't take insurance and which specializes in providing comprehensive blood labs and some other services. But their main thing are the blood labs. And full disclosure, I am now a patient at Ways to Well. And as you know, I do not take advertising money on this show, and so nothing I'm about to say to you is something I am being paid to say. And I get no discount for saying any of this to you either. They don't even know I'm about to say this. But I became a patient at Ways to Well after hearing the founders speak to Joe Rogan for 3 hours. And I loved Brigham Bueller's entire philosophy on healthcare. He used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and from the inside, he diagnosed our health system as the giant scam that it is. Our healthcare system in the United States is designed to enrich middlemen corporations, insurance companies, PBMs, and the shareholders that they serve to enrich. And so, as such a system, it's not designed to provide us true health care. Our system is one that profits off of us being sick. And it was really refreshing to hear someone speak about our healthcare system using the words that sound like truth as I know them. And in the show notes, I provided links to all of Brigham Bueller's Joe Rogan Experience appearances if you want to hear them. But it was the second one, recorded in December 2023. That's the one that inspired me to become a patient. And I am a very happy patient so far at that. Because I paid about $500 for their comprehensive blood work, which is a lot of money to pay out of pocket. Trust me, I know. But the knowledge that I got has the potential to, well, not potential, it has already changed my life. The way it works is that once I signed up with Ways to Well, they sent me to a local LabCorp and I got my blood drawn and they sent my blood tests to Ways to Well. And Ways to Well arranged everything. There was no work for me to do at all. And their tests, they actually looked for a lot more than I generally get tested for at my doctor's, including my hormones. And so then 2 weeks later, I had a 45-minute session with one of their nurse practitioners who explained to me the significance of every single number that was measured on my blood test. Because I have no idea what those numbers are that come back on my blood test. Basically, when I get a blood test, my doctor looks at those and tells me I'm either dying or I'm not, and that's about it. I never have had anyone explain to me what those numbers are. And so for the first time in my life, someone went down the list, the whole list, and explained to me what each of those numbers mean and how I can use food and supplements to get all of those numbers to not just be okay, but be optimal. And they didn't then try to sell me a bunch of expensive supplements either. This isn't some Alex Jones supplement hawking operation. I got all of the supplements they recommended off of Amazon. And one of the recommendations that they gave me was for Brazil nuts, because apparently 2 to 3 Brazil nuts give you all of the selenium that you need in a day, and selenium is great at fighting off skin cancers, which is something that my insurance-based doctors and dermatologists never told me. This was literally the most valuable doctor's appointment I've ever had in my entire life. And so when I found out that that guy who founded this amazing telehealth company was testifying to Congress, Yeah, you bet I found that hearing, that roundtable, and it didn't disappoint. And actually, now that I think about it, I don't even think I have any Brigham Bueller clips in this episode for you. There was just too much good stuff. And so even though he brought me to the hearing, he didn't make the cut. But who did make the cut was the co-host of the roundtable, who I wasn't expecting to see. And that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who Donald Trump has picked to be our next Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is the most powerful position in our national healthcare system. But I got a lot of really valuable information from this hearing, and especially the roundtable. They had information about who makes our food and who decides what's in it and who's making sure there aren't poisons in our food. And spoiler alert, the answer is largely no one. And since these are congressional events, these hearings also examined who's trying to fix that. And so that's what you'll be learning about today. If you eat food in the United States or have loved ones in the United States who do, this episode is for you. And if you get value from having the highlights from 7.5 hours of testimony pulled out and summarized for you like this, please pay for the show because we won't be interrupting the testimony with ads, and we won't be holding anything back for fear of pissing off an advertiser. That's corporate media's game, not ours. But this podcast is my full-time job. This is my business, and I do pay other people to help me. And so I do need to get paid. And so we are crowdfunding here. And the way this works is that you pay whatever you think is fair for this episode, and I will keep making more episodes. But you are the producer of this show, and that's no lie. I know what episodes make me the most money. I know what I'm incentivized to do. Voting with your wallet really does work here, and that's especially true at the executive producer level, because each executive producer credit is worth $535. That's how much a public vouch on an episode costs. And the most vouched for episodes are the ones that get heard the most because we have an automated system that generates the most valuable episodes list based on the number of executive producers on it. And so when I'm deciding what topics to cover, I do check that list because I want to know which ones pay. And you know what? Why wait to the end for this? I would like to thank our new executive producers, although I know this one's a repeat. I would like to thank Justin Becker, who is now an executive producer on episode 304, Trump Returns. And I'd also like to thank Benjamin, who has 2 executive producer credits. He put one of them on Congressional Dish 287, War Money, and that was the hardest episode I've ever done in my entire life. It took me 2 months to do that because that was the episode where I told you what I learned about the history of Israel. And along the same lines, he also now has an executive producer credit on Congressional Dish 290, Israel War Money, What's Already Law. And so thank you for becoming executive producers on those episodes. All of those episodes just moved up the list. And I love this business model. The best decision I've ever made was bringing you into the company instead of merging with the corporations and serving your time up to them. I love working with you, for you, as opposed to selling you as a download to a sponsor. And so to join the ranks of or remain a Congressional Dish producer, please support this show and this business relationship by using whatever method you like best. You can pay per episode on Patreon, you can send in PayPals or Zells, you can send paper checks or Venmos or use Cash App or Bitcoin, whatever you want. If it works for you, it works for me. And everything you need to do so is on the Support the Show page on congressionaldish.com. But now, let's get to what you're paying for. And before we get to the clips, let me explain the roundtable, just the structure of it, because most of the sound clips will be coming from that. And the roundtable, like I said, it's not an official hearing. The rules are different. And the most notable difference is going to be that the audience is allowed to applaud and members of Congress are allowed to ask questions whenever they want to. There's no limits on their time. And in this one, that really wasn't a factor because there were only 2 members of Congress there. This particular roundtable was organized by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who I must say is a Republican who has been credibly accused of trying to help Donald Trump try to remain president after losing the 2020 election. And so I don't generally trust Ron Johnson, but he is a senator who will likely have the ear of the returning president. And likely to have the ear of the incoming President Trump is the man who is in attendance for the entire hearing and who acted as a co-host of the roundtable with Ron Johnson. And I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, again, Donald Trump just announced as his choice to run the entire Department of Health and Human Services. And I know that a lot of people have opinions about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And to be honest, I don't know what to believe. I've never met the man, and chances are neither have you. But his family is the closest thing that us Americans have to royalty. He's a Kennedy. And there's just something magical and mystical about the Kennedys. His uncle was President John F. Kennedy. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was his Aunt Jackie. His dad was Robert F. Kennedy, who was our Attorney General and United States Senator before someone shot and killed him while he was running for president in an election that he had a really good chance of winning. You know the story of the Kennedys because they're royalty. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was 12 years old when his father was shot and killed. A few years later, RFK Jr. attended and graduated from Harvard University and then went to get a law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. For his entire legal career, he has been focused on protecting the environment from polluters. This is a person who has actually been fighting against corporations and against the damage that they do to all of us. He's been in that fight for decades, and he's won legal battles against large corporate polluters. He knows their dirty tricks, and he knows their legal maneuvers. And he's also a really weird dude. He has said things about vaccines that I don't know enough about vaccines to judge the accuracy of, but he has said things that has pissed people off. And in terms of saying things in general, he also has spasmodic dysphonia, I think is how you say it. But that's what makes him sound like one of those smokers that's now speaking out of a hole out of their neck. He also told Roseanne Barr on video recently that he dumped the body of a bear in Central Park. And he had an actual brain worm removed from his head. He's strange. But for most of the last 2 years, he's been threatening the powerful in both of our two corporate parties by daring to run for president without their blessings. First, because he's been a Democrat his entire life and is in fact a member of Democratic Party royalty, he wanted to run as a Democrat. But as we know, for this election, the Democratic Party elites, they chose the candidate for us. They refused to have a real primary. And so RFK Jr. ran as an independent. And all of that royally pissed the Democrats off. And so the Democratic Party elite have been talking shit on him as a matter of strategy for the better part of the last 2 years. And the Republicans also had a professional, coordinated effort to trash the guy for months as well, when he was running as an independent and therefore challenging dear leader Trump. And so I'm skeptical of literally every single thing I've ever heard about RFK Jr. He's weird, no doubt, but there has been a well-funded bullshit campaign going on about him for a long time, funded by both parties. But at this roundtable where he was a guest and was treated with respect, he got to speak for himself. And I'm going to play more for you here about what he said than I ordinarily would, but I think it's important to hear him talk about this stuff, to hear the man himself, considering he's Trump's pick for the head of Health and Human Services, which is an incredibly powerful position. Because as the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, he'd be ultimately in charge of the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Indian Health Service. It's our whole health system. His job would be to operate that system in a holistic way. And so here's some of the comments he made at the roundtable.
For 19 years, solving the childhood chronic disease crisis has been the central goal of my life. And for 19 years, I have prayed to God every morning to put me in a position to end this calamity. I believe we have the opportunity for transformational bipartisan change to transform American health, to hypercharge our human capital, to improve our budget, and I believe to save our spirits and our country. When discussing improvements to U.S. healthcare policy, politicians from both parties often say that we have the best healthcare system in the world. That is a lie. Every major pillar of the U.S. healthcare system, as a statement of economic fact, makes money when Americans get sick. The most valuable asset in this country today is a sick child. The pharma industry, the hospital industry, and medical school industry make more money when there are more interventions to perform on Americans. And by requiring insurance companies to take no more than 15% of premiums, Obamacare actually incentivized insurance companies to raise premiums to get 15% of a larger pie. This is why premiums have increased 100% since the passage of Obamacare, making healthcare the largest driver of inflation while American life expectancy plummets. We spend 4 times per capita on healthcare than the Italians, but Italians live 7.5 years longer than us on average. And incidentally, Americans had one of the highest life expectancies in the world when I was growing up. Today, we've fallen an average of 6 years behind our European neighbors. Are we lazier and more suicidal than Italians? Or is there a problem with our system? Are there problems with our incentives? Are there problems with our food? So what's causing all of this suffering? I'll name 2 culprits. First and worst is ultra-processed foods.
And so to get some science-y reasons for why RFK Jr. would say that, we're going to pop on over to the hearing that took place in the House Committee on Ways and Means. And so our first witness is going to be a man who really missed his calling as a gynecologist, Dr. Mark Hyman, who's a practicing family physician and the co-founder and chief medical officer of Function Health. He's also the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, the founder of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and the board president for clinical affairs for the Institute for Functional Medicine. He's also the founder and chairman of the Food Fix campaign, which is dedicated to transforming our food and agriculture system through policy. And he's the host of a health podcast called The Doctor's Pharmacy. And here is what he told the House Committee on Ways and Means.
Food is literally a code that you're eating. Every molecule in the food you're eating translates into changes in your biology, in your gene expression, your immune system, your brain chemistry, your microbiome, your hormones. They're all regulated by the molecules you eat. And if they're molecules that produce health, it creates health. If they're molecules that produce disease, you get sick. And primarily the molecules that we're eating in America are not actually food. Food, by the definition in the Webster's Dictionary, is something that promotes the growth and health of an organism. By definition, most of what America's eating in ultra-processed food is not food. It actually does the opposite. It promotes disease. I'm deeply committed to reversing America's chronic disease epidemic by addressing its root cause, our modern ultra-processed diet. Unlike healthy foods, ultra-processed foods are high in sugar, starch, refined oils. They often contain industrial ingredients such as preservatives, emulsifiers, artificial flavors, colors, and sweeteners. Also, they have a long shelf life and are fast to prepare and eat, but with devastating consequences. Nutritious food has the power to make us healthier, but processed foods drive the chronic diseases that are the leading cause of death and disability in the U.S. today. 60% of Americans have at least one chronic disease, 40% have 2 or more. 93.2% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. What does that mean? It means they have high blood pressure, high blood sugar, abnormal cholesterol, are overweight, or have had a heart attack or stroke. That means 6.8% of Americans are not metabolically unhealthy. And 1 in 10 Americans has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, including 1 in 4 teenagers. And the culprit is what we consume. About 60% of our diet is ultra-processed foods, which are new to nature foods. They're not really food by the definition of food. And among children, the share of their diet that's ultra-processed food is 67%. For every 10% of your diet that's ultra-processed food, your risk of death goes up by 14%. It's the #1 killer globally.
And so now jumping back over to the roundtable to continue with this lesson in metabolic health and dysfunction, let's listen to some testimony from Dr. Chris Palmer. Here's Senator Ron Johnson, host of the roundtable, with an introduction.
Our next presenter is Dr. Chris Palmer. Dr. Palmer is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, researcher, and author of The Brain Energy, where he explores a groundbreaking connection between metabolic health and mental illness. He is a leader in innovative approaches to treating psychiatric conditions, advocating for the use of diet and metabolic interventions to improve mental health outcomes. Dr. Palmer's work is reshaping how the medical field views and treats mental health disorders.
And here's Dr. Palmer.
Obesity, diabetes, fatty liver all share something in common. They are, in fact, metabolic dysfunction. I'm going to go into a little bit of the science just to make sure we're all on the same page. Although most people think of metabolism as burning calories, it is far more than that. Metabolism is a series of chemical reactions that convert food into energy and building blocks essential for cellular health. When we have metabolic dysfunction, it can drive numerous chronic diseases, which is a paradigm shift in the medical field. Now, there is no doubt metabolism is complicated. It really is. It is influenced by biological, psychological, environmental, and social factors. And the medical field says this complexity is the reason we can't solve the obesity epidemic. Because they're still trying to understand every molecular detail of biology. But in fact, we don't need to understand biology in order to understand the cause. The cause is coming from our environment, a toxic environment like poor diet and exposure to harmful chemicals. And these are actually quite easy to study, understand, and address. There is no doubt food plays a key role. It provides the substrate for energy and building blocks. Nutritious foods support metabolism, while ultra-processed options can disrupt it. It is shocking that today in 2024, the FDA allows food manufacturers to introduce brand new chemicals into our food supply without adequate testing. The manufacturers are allowed to determine for themselves whether this substance is safe for you and your family to eat or not. Metabolism's impact goes beyond physical health. I am a psychiatrist. Some of you are probably wondering, why are you here? It also affects mental health. Because guess what? The human brain is an organ too. And when brain metabolism is impaired, it can cause symptoms that we call mental illness. It is no coincidence that as the rates of obesity and diabetes are skyrocketing, so too are the rates of mental illness. In case you didn't know, we have a mental health crisis. We have all-time prevalence highs for depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, deaths of despair, drug overdoses, ADHD, and autism. What does the mental health field have to say for this? Well, mental illness is just chemical imbalances or maybe trauma and stress. That is wholly insufficient to explain the epidemic that we are seeing. And in fact, there is a better way to integrate the biopsychosocial factors known to play a role in mental illness. Mental disorders at their core are often metabolic disorders impacting the brain. It's not surprising to most people that obesity and diabetes might play a role in depression or anxiety. But the rates of autism have quadrupled in just 20 years. And the rates of ADHD have tripled over that same period of time. These are neurodevelopmental disorders. And many people are struggling to understand how on earth could they rise so rapidly. But it turns out that metabolism plays a profound role in neurodevelopment. And sure enough, parents with metabolic issues like obesity and diabetes are more likely to have children with autism and ADHD. This is not about fat shaming, because what I am arguing is that the same foods and chemicals and other drivers of obesity that are causing obesity in the parents are affecting the brain health of our children. There is compelling evidence that food plays a direct role in mental health. One study of nearly 300,000 people found that those who eat ultra-processed foods daily are 3 times more likely to struggle with their mental health than people who never or rarely consume them. A systematic review found direct associations between ultra-processed food exposure and 32 different health parameters, including mental health conditions. Now, I'm not here to say that food is the only or even primary driver of mental illness. Let's go back to something familiar. Trauma and stress do drive mental illness. But for those of you who don't know, trauma and stress are also associated with increased rates of obesity and diabetes. Trauma and stress change human metabolism. We need to put the science together. This brings me to a key point. We cannot separate physical and mental health from metabolic health. Addressing metabolic dysfunction has the potential to prevent and treat a wide range of chronic diseases.
If processed foods are having such negative effects on our metabolic health, both physical and mental, why are we eating so many of them? How can something so bad for us taste and feel so good? Well, going back to the hearing in the Ways and Means Committee, here's Dr. Ashley Gerhardt, a professor of psychology for food and addiction science and treatment at the University of Michigan.
Addictive substances are things that man makes by taking often a plant or a fruit and processing it and altering it so it rapidly delivers a reinforcing agent into the brain and into the body. We aren't really evolved to care whether we're getting enough nicotine or getting enough ethanol, but we come out of the womb liking sugar, needing fat, needing enough calories. And so now our food science technology has advanced so rapidly that they're able to make very cheap, irresistible foods that amplify the rewarding nature in the brain. And we just have really never evolved to be protected from that. And when we look at a food supply where this is the dominant source of calories in most groceries, that when people see the brands or smell the smells of the Cinnabon in the airport, it triggers such an intense desire in the brain that even if you see the salad or the very sad-looking apple at the airport, it's hard to make that choice, even if you might know it's healthy for you. Many of these ultra-processed products share characteristics similar to recognized addictive substances. They deliver unnaturally high doses of rapidly absorbed carbohydrates and fats, effectively triggering reward mechanisms in the brain. Research shows that sugar, fat, and ultra-processed foods can activate the brain's reward system at similar magnitudes as nicotine and ethanol. These products, enhanced with additives and coupled with texture and flavor modifications, resemble addictive substances like cigarettes, making them difficult to resist despite harmful health consequences. More than 280 studies estimate that 14% of adults and 12% of children would meet the criteria for an addictive disorder based on their intake of ultra-processed foods. This prevalence is doubled in individuals with obesity. If addictive mechanisms are being triggered by ultra-processed foods, this may be an overlooked reason why it can be challenging to reduce their intake, even in the face of life-threatening health conditions like diabetes.
And it turns out that not only are these foods addictive, but they were designed to be addictive. The next clip is from Callie Means. He's a former lobbyist for the food and drug industry, and this is his testimony to the roundtable.
Our processed food industry was created by the cigarette industry. In the 1980s, after decades of inaction, the Surgeon General and the U.S. government finally said that smoking might be harmful, and smoking rates plummeted. We listened to doctors in this country. We listened to medical leadership. And as smoking rates plummeted, cigarette companies with their big balance sheets strategically bought up food companies. And by 1990, the 2 largest food companies in the world were Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, 2 cigarette companies. These cigarette companies moved 2 departments over from the cigarette department to the food department. They moved the scientists. Cigarette companies were the highest payers of scientists, one of the biggest employers of scientists to make the cigarettes addictive. They moved these addiction specialists, world-leading addiction specialists, to the food department by the thousands. And those scientists weaponize our ultra-processed food. That is the problem with ultra-processed food. You have the best scientists in the world creating this food to be palatable and to be addictive. They then move their lobbyists over. They use the same playbook. And their lobbyists co-opted the USDA and created the food pyramid. The food pyramid was a document created by the cigarette industry through complete corporate capture and was an ultra-processed food marketing document saying that we needed to eat a bunch of carbs and sugar. And we listened to medical experts in this country. The American people, American parents, many parents who had kids in the 90s thought it was a good thing to do to give their kids a bunch of ultra-processed food. And carb consumption went up 20% in the American diet in the next 10 years. The devil's bargain comes in that this ultra-processed food consumption has been one of the most profitable dynamics in American history for the healthcare industry. If you think about a medical miracle, it's almost certainly a solution that was invented before 1960 for an acute condition. Emergency surgical procedures to ensure a complicated childbirth wasn't a death sentence, sanitation procedures, antibiotics that ensured infection was an inconvenience, not deadly, eradicating polio, regular waste management procedures that helped control outbreaks like the bubonic plague, sewage systems that replaced the cesspools and open drains, preventing human waste from contaminating the water. The U.S. health system is a miracle in solving acute conditions that will kill us right away. But economically, acute conditions aren't great in our modern system because the patient is quickly cured and is no longer a customer. Starting in the 1960s, the medical system took the trust engendered by these acute innovations like antibiotics, which were credited with winning World War II. And they used that trust to ask patients not to question its authority on chronic diseases, which can last a lifetime and are more profitable. But the medicalization of chronic disease in the past 50 years has been an abject failure. Today, we're in a siloed system where there's a treatment for everything, and let's just look at the stats. As heart disease has gone up as more statins are prescribed. Type 2 diabetes has gone up as more metformin is prescribed. ADHD has gone up as more Adderall is prescribed. Depression and suicide has gone up as more SSRIs are prescribed. Pain has gone up as more opioids are prescribed. Cancer has gone up as we've spent more on cancer. And now JP Morgan, literally at the conference in San Francisco recently, they put up a graph. And they showed as more Ozempic is projected to be prescribed over the next 10 years, obesity rates are going to go up as more Ozempic is prescribed. Explain that to me. It was clapping. All the bankers were clapping like seals at this graphic. Our intervention-based system is by design. In the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller, using that he could use byproducts from oil production to create pharmaceuticals, heavily funded medical schools throughout the United States to teach a curriculum based on the intervention-first model of Dr. William Stewart Halsted, the founding physician of Johns Hopkins, who created the residency-based model that viewed invasive surgical procedures and medication as the highest echelon of medicine. An employee of Rockefeller's was tasked to create the Flexner Report, which outlined a vision for medical education that prioritized interventions and stigmatized nutritional and holistic remedies. Congress affirmed the Flexner Report in 1910 to establish that any credentialed medical institution in the United States had to follow the Halsted-Rockefeller intervention-based model that silos disease, and to downplay viewing the body as an interconnected system. It later came out that Dr. Halsted's cocaine and morphine addiction fueled his day-long surgical residencies, and most of the medical logic underlying the Flexner Report was wrong, but that hasn't prevented the report and the Halsted-Rockefeller engine-based brand of medicine from being the foundational document that Congress uses to regulate medical education today.
And there does seem to be something very wrong with medical education in this country when this is testimony being given by a practicing physician to the House Ways and Means Committee. Here's Dr. Mark Hyman.
We must train tomorrow's clinicians in the science of nutrition and its role in causing and curing chronic disease. In medical school, I learned nothing about nutrition. 40 years later, My daughter, a fourth-year medical student, also received zero nutrition education.
Which mirrors what another doctor said during the roundtable. The following clip is of Casey Means, who's the sister of the former food and drug industry lobbyist that we've been listening to, Callie Means. But Casey Means is a Stanford Medical School trained surgeon who left her career as a practicing surgeon to focus on advocating for preventative medicine. Her most effective effort in that regard so far has been the book that she co-wrote with her brother called Good Energy. And here's what she said during Senator Ron Johnson's roundtable on September 25th, to which Senator Johnson had some follow-up questions.
It's not an overstatement to say that I learned virtually nothing at Stanford Medical School about the tens of thousands of scientific papers that elucidate these root causes of why American health is plummeting and how environmental factors are causing it. For instance, in medical school, I did not learn that for each additional serving of ultra-processed food we eat, early mortality increases by 18%. This now makes up 67% of the foods our kids are eating. I took 0 nutrition courses in medical school. I didn't learn that 82% of independently funded studies show harm from processed food, while 93% of industry-sponsored studies reflect no harm. In medical school, I didn't learn that 95% of the people who created the recent USDA food guidelines for America had significant conflicts of interest with the food industry. I did not learn that 1 billion pounds of synthetic pesticides are being sprayed on our food every single year. 99% of the farmland in the United States is sprayed with synthetic pesticides, many from China and Germany. And these invisible, tasteless chemicals are strongly linked to autism, ADHD, sex hormone disruption, thyroid disease, sperm dysfunction, Alzheimer's, dementia, birth defects, cancer, obesity, liver dysfunction, female infertility, and more, all by hurting our metabolic health. I did not learn that the 8 billion tons of plastic that have been produced just in the last 100 years, plastic was only invented about 100 years ago, are being broken down into microplastics that are now filling our food, our water, and we are now even inhaling them in our air. And that very recent research from just the past couple of months tells us that now about 0.5% of our brains by weight are now plastic. I didn't learn that there are more than 80,000 toxins that have entered our food, water, air, and homes by industry, many of which are banned in Europe, and they are known to alter our gene expression, alter our microbiome composition and the lining of our gut, and disrupt our hormones. I didn't learn that heavy metals like aluminum and lead are present in our food, our baby formula, personal care products, our soil, and many of the mandated medications like vaccines, and that these metals are neurotoxic and inflammatory. I didn't learn that the average American walks a paltry 3,500 steps per day, even though we know, based on science and top journals, that simply walking 7,000 steps a day slashes by 40 to 60% our risk of Alzheimer's, dementia, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and obesity. I certainly did not learn that medical error and medications are the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. I didn't learn that just 5 nights of sleep deprivation can induce full-blown prediabetes. I learned nothing about sleep. And we're getting about 20% less sleep on average than we were 100 years ago. I didn't learn that American children are getting less time outdoors now than a maximum security prisoner. And on average, adults spend 93% of their time indoors, even though we know from the science that separation from sunlight destroys our circadian biology, and circadian biology dictates our cellular biology. I didn't learn that professional organizations that we get our practice guideline from, like the American Diabetes Association and American Academy of Pediatrics, have taken tens of millions of dollars from Coke, Cadbury, processed food companies, and vaccine manufacturers like Moderna. I didn't learn that if we address these root causes that all lead to metabolic dysfunction and help patients change their food and lifestyle patterns with united, strong voice, we could reverse the chronic disease crisis in America, save millions of lives and trillions of dollars in healthcare costs per year. Instead, doctors are learning that the body is 100 separate parts, and we learn how to drug, we learn how to cut, and we learn how to bill. I'll close by saying that what we are dealing with here is so much more than a physical health crisis. This is a spiritual crisis. We are choosing death over light. We are choosing death over life. We are choosing darkness over light for people and the planet, which are inextricably linked. We are choosing to erroneously believe that we are separate from nature and that we can continue to poison nature and then outsmart it. Our path out will be a renewed respect for the miracle of life and a renewed respect for nature. We can restore health to Americans rapidly with smart policy and courageous leadership. We need a return to courage. We need a return to common sense and intuition. We need a return to awe for the sheer miraculousness of our lives. We need all hands on deck. Thank you.
We're not letting you off that easy. I've got a couple questions. So you outlined some basic facts that doctors should know, that truthfully you could cover in 1 hour of an introductory class in medical school.
Yes.
So why aren't we teaching doctors these things?
The easy thing to, is it on? Yeah. The easy thing to say would be, follow the money. That sounds sort of trite. But frankly, I think that is the truth, but not in the way you might think, that like doctors are out to make money or even medical schools. The money and the core incentive problem, which is that every institution that touches our health in America, from medical schools to pharmaceutical companies, to health insurance companies, to hospitals, doctor's offices. They make more money when we are sick and less when we are healthy. That simple one incentive problem corrodes every aspect of the way medicine is thought about, the way we think about the body. We talked about interconnectedness. It creates a system in which we silo the body into all these separate parts and create that illusion that we all buy into, because it's profitable to send people to separate specialties. So it corrodes even the foundational conception of how we think about the body. So it is about incentives and money, but I would say that's the invisible hand. It's not necessarily affecting each doctor's clinical practice or the decision-making. It's corroding every lever of the basics of how we even consider what the human body is and what life is.
So in your book, you do a really good job of describing how, because of the specialization of medicine, you don't see the forest for the trees. The fact is, you do need specialized medicine. I mean, doctors can't know it all. So I think the question is, how do we get back to the rewards for general practitioners that do focus on, what you're writing about?
Yeah. I have huge respect for doctors, and I am incredibly grateful for the American healthcare system, which has produced miracles. And we absolutely need to continue to have primary care doctors and specialists, and they should be rewarded highly. However, if we focused on what everyone here is talking about, I think we'd have 90% less throughput through our healthcare system. We would be able to have these doctors probably have a much better life, to be honest, because right now doctors are working 100 hours a week, seeing 50, 60, 70 patients, and could actually have more time with patients who develop these acute issues that need to be treated by a doctor. But so many of the things in the specialist office are chronic conditions that we know are fundamentally rooted in the cellular dysfunction I described, which is metabolic dysfunction, which is created by our lifestyle. So I think that there's always going to be a place for specialists, but so much fewer. And I think if we had a different conception for the body as interconnected, they would also interact with each other in a very different way, a much more collaborative way. And then, of course, we need to incentivize doctors in the healthcare system towards outcomes, not throughput.
I personally, in my recent health awakening, have been receptive to this message, and I've been going outside the basic health insurance system and out of pocket to get healthcare that's more holistic, as in addressing my body as a whole instead of just a collection of parts. And food as medicine makes perfect sense to me. Of course, what we feed our bodies is what becomes our bodies. And I've largely cut processed foods down in my regular diet, and I feel so much better physically and mentally. But there are additional dangers lurking in the processed foods and the actual food as well here in the United States. Dangers that are unique to the United States, which currently has a government that is subservient to corporations. And so here's our likely incoming Health and Human Services Secretary, RFK Jr., who diagnosed processed freak foods as the first cause of our collective health problems.
The second culprit is toxic chemicals in our food, our medicine, and our environment.
The following testimony is from Vani Hari, and she is a food activist known as the Food Babe. She has over 2 million followers on Instagram, including me. And so here's some examples of why she has made a whole career out of fighting food companies in the United States.
Our government is letting U.S. food companies get away with serving American citizens harmful ingredients that are banned or heavily regulated in other countries. Even worse, American food companies are selling the same exact products overseas without these chemicals, but choose to continue serving us the most toxic version here. It's un-American. One set of ingredients, thank you. One set of ingredients there and one set of ingredients here. Let me give you some examples. Thank you. You want to do my honor. Here we go. My Vanna White, everybody. This is McDonald's French fries. I would like to argue that probably nobody in this room has not had a McDonald's French fries, by the way. Nobody raised their hand during the staff meeting earlier today. In the US, there's 11 ingredients. In the UK, there's 3, and salt is optional. An ingredient called dimethylpolysiloxane is an ingredient preserved with formaldehyde, a neurotoxin, in the US version. This is used as a foaming agent so they don't have to replace the oil that often, making McDonald's more money here in the United States. But they don't do that across the pond. This is Skittles. Notice the long list of ingredient differences. 10 artificial dyes in the US version and titanium dioxide. This ingredient is banned in Europe because it can cause DNA damage. Artificial dyes are made from petroleum, and products containing these dyes require a warning label in Europe that states it may cause adverse effects on activity and attention in children. And they have been linked to cancer and disruptions in the immune system. This on the screen back here is Gatorade. In the US, they use red 40 and caramel color. In Germany, they don't. They use carrot and sweet potatoes to color their Gatorade. This is Doritos. The US version has 3 different artificial dyes and MSG. The UK version does not. And let's look at cereal. General Mills is definitely playing some tricks on us. They launched a new version of Trix just recently in Australia. It has no dyes. They even advertise that when the US version still does. This is why I became a food activist. My name is Vani Hari, and I only want one thing. I want Americans to be treated the same way as citizens in other countries by our own American companies.
And for an explanation of how this is possible, here's Jason Karp. He's a former hedge funder who battled an autoimmune disease in his 20s that he was told was incurable and could only be managed with lots of pharmaceuticals. But after drastically changing his diet and eliminating processed foods and chemical additives, his incurable disease basically was cured. And so now he owns a company called Hue Kitchen, as in Human Kitchen, that creates and sells healthy snacks. Here's his testimony to the roundtable.
Having studied the evolution of corporations, I believe the root cause of how we got here is an unintended consequence of the unchecked and misguided industrialization of agriculture and food. I believe there are two key drivers behind how we got here. First, America has much looser regulatory approach to approving new ingredients and chemicals than comparable developed countries. Europe, for example, uses a guilty until proven innocent standard for the approval of new chemicals, which mandates that if an ingredient might pose a potential health risk, it should be restricted or banned for up to 10 years until it is proven safe. In complete contrast, our FDA uses an innocent until proven guilty approach for new chemicals or ingredients that's known as GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. This recklessly allows new chemicals into our food system until they are proven harmful. Shockingly, U.S. food companies can use their own independent experts to bring forth a new chemical without the approval of the FDA. It is a travesty that the majority of Americans don't even know they are constantly exposed to thousands of untested ingredients that are actually banned or regulated in other countries. To put it bluntly, for the last 50 years, we have been running the largest uncontrolled science experiment ever done on humanity without their consent.
And this sounded hard for me to believe, and so I looked up the guidelines for how the generally recognized as safe chemicals are determined, and you can see it for yourself in the show notes. The FDA itself says that the process is that the company sends safety data and information to the FDA, and then the FDA uses the company's data to determine whether the chemical is safe. In other words, the FDA is not doing its own research on these chemicals that are being added to our food. They're using what the companies are handing to them to make those decisions, which is a process that I personally don't think is trustworthy at all. This is a system based on trust. Trusting that for-profit corporations are giving the government all relevant data, and not just the data that makes their profitable foods look safe. For-profit corporations have prioritized their profits too many times for us to have a system based on trusting them. And if you think that you can avoid chemicals by avoiding trash food like Trix cereal or Gatorade or any manufactured foods, if you think you're safe because you just eat meat and veggies, think again, not here in America. Here's Courtney Swan, who has a master's degree in nutritional science and is a practicing nutritionist.
Our current agriculture system origin story involves large chemical companies, not farmers, chemists. 85% of the food that you are consuming started from a patented seed sold by a chemical corporation that was responsible for creating Agent Orange in the Vietnam War. Why are chemical companies feeding America? Corn, soy, and wheat are not only the most common allergens, but are among the most heavily pesticide-sprayed crops today. In 1974, the U.S. started spraying our crops with an herbicide called glyphosate. And in the early 1990s, we began to see the release of genetically modified foods into our food supply. It all seems to begin with a chemical company by the name IG Farben, the later parent company of Bayer. Farben provided the chemicals used in Nazi nerve agents and gas chambers. Years later, a second chemical company, Monsanto, joined the war industry with the production of Agent Orange, a toxin used during the Vietnam War. When the wars ended, these companies needed a market for their chemicals. So they pivoted to killing bugs and pests on American farmlands. Monsanto began marketing glyphosate with the catchy name Roundup. They claimed that these chemicals were harmless and that they safeguarded our crops from pests. So farmers started spraying these supposedly safe chemicals on our farmland. They solved the bug problem, but they also killed the crops. Monsanto offered a solution with the creation of genetically modified, otherwise known as GMO crops that resisted the glyphosate in the Roundup that they were spraying. These Roundup-ready crops allow farmers to spray entire fields with glyphosate to kill off pests without harming the plants. But our food is left covered in toxic chemical residue that doesn't wash, dry, or cook off. Not only is it sprayed to kill pests, but in the final stages of harvest, it is sprayed on the wheat to dry it out. Grains that go into bread and cereals that are in grocery stores and homes of Americans are heavily sprayed with these toxins. It's also being sprayed on oats, chickpeas, almonds, potatoes, and more. You can assume that if it's not organic, it is likely contaminated with glyphosate. In America, organic food by law cannot contain GMOs and glyphosate, and they are more expensive compared to conventionally grown options. Americans are being forced to pay more for food that isn't poisoned. The Environmental Working Group reported a test of popular wheat-based products and found glyphosate contamination in 80 to 90% of the products on grocery store shelves. Popular foods like Cheerios, Goldfish, chickpea pasta like Banza, Nature Valley bars were found to have concerning levels of glyphosate. If that is not alarming enough, glyphosate is produced by and distributed from China. In 2018, Bayer bought Monsanto. They currently have patented soybeans, corn, canola, and sugar beets, and they are the largest distributor of GMO corn and soybean seeds. Americans deserve a straight answer. Why does an agrochemical company own where our food comes from? Currently, 85 to 100% of corn and soy crops in the US are genetically modified. 80% of GMOs are engineered to withstand glyphosate. And a staggering 280 million pounds of glyphosate are sprayed on American crops annually. We are eating this Roundup-ready corn, but unlike GMO crops, humans are not Roundup-ready. We are not resistant to these toxins, and it's causing neurological damage, endocrine disruption. It's harming our reproductive health, and it's affecting fetal development. Glyphosate is classified as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer. It is also suspected to contribute towards the rise in celiac disease and gluten sensitivities. They're finding glyphosate in human breast milk, placentas, our organs, and even sperm. It's also being found in our rain and our drinking water. Until January of 2022, many companies made efforts to obscure the presence of GMOs and pesticides in food products from American consumers. It was only then that legislation came into effect mandating that these companies disclose such ingredients with a straightforward label stating made with bioengineered ingredients, but it's very small on the package. Meanwhile, glyphosate still isn't labeled on our food. Parents in America are unknowingly feeding their children these toxic foods. Dr. Don Huber, a glyphosate researcher, warns that glyphosate will make the outlawed 1970s insecticide DDT look harmless in comparison to glyphosate. Why is the US government subsidizing the most pesticide-sprayed crops using taxpayer dollars? These are the exact foods that are driving the epidemic of chronic disease. These crops, heavily sprayed with glyphosate, are then processed into high fructose corn syrup and refined vegetable oils, which are key ingredients for the ultra-processed foods that line our supermarket shelves and fill our children's lunches in schools across the nation. Children across America are consuming foods such as Goldfish and Cheerios that are loaded with glyphosate. These crops also feed our livestock, which then produce the eggs, dairy, and meat products that we consume. They are in everything. Pick up almost any ultra-processed food package on the shelf, and you will see the words contains corn, wheat, and soy on the ingredients panel. Meanwhile, Bayer is doing everything it can to keep consumers in the dark while our government protects these corporate giants. They fund educational programs at major agricultural universities, they lobby in Washington, and they collaborate with lawmakers to protect their profits over public health. 2 congressmen are working with Bayer right now on the Farm Bill to protect Bayer from any liability despite already having to pay out billions to sick Americans who got cancer from their product. They know that their product is harming people.
Now, the Farm Bill is supposed to be updated and passed into law every 5 years, and it is now officially overdue. And it's looking increasingly likely, now that the Republicans know they will have more power in the next Congress, that they're going to extend their deadline on the Farm Bill until the 119th Congress. Maybe. They might pass it in the lame duck, but I don't think so, because they do have the opportunity to kick it into the next Trump administration. But I've read a farm bill before, and it provides massive amounts of our tax money to corporations that produce corn and soy in particular. The Farm Bill is a giant corporate favor with a boring name, and so no one pays attention. But we should pay attention to it, and I do intend to read the next version that becomes law. And I wish she had named the 2 congressmen that are trying to help Bayer get legal immunity for poisoning us via dingleberry. But I'm not surprised that there are members of Congress doing this dangerous company's bidding, because Bayer spends about $6 or $7 million per year paying 53 lobbyists to talk to members of Congress on the company's behalf. And one of their lobbyists, you might remember this guy, Colin Peterson, he's a former member of Congress himself. Bayer has paid this former member of Congress $180,000 this year, which is more than the average yearly salary for a member of Congress. When members of Congress insert corporate favors into laws, this is the future they are setting themselves up for. In total, that we know of, former member of Congress Colin Peterson made $825,000 this year from his 10 clients, including Bayer, according to OpenSecrets.org. So, selling out the public pays real good. And that seems to be the central issue here. Lots of people getting paid real well and then using their wealth to corrupt our government officials. Here's Dr. Chris Palmer, the psychiatrist who taught us about metabolic health.
Your question is, why are our health agencies not exploring these questions? It's because the health agencies are largely influenced by the industries they are supposed to be regulating and looking out for. The medical education community is largely controlled by pharmaceutical companies. $1.5 billion goes to support, $1.5 billion every year goes to support physician education. That's from pharmaceutical companies, $1.5 billion from pharmaceutical companies. So physicians are getting educated with some influence, large influence, I would argue, by them. The health organizations, it's a political issue. The NIH, it's politics. Politicians are selecting people to be on the committees or people to oversee these organizations. Politicians rely on donations from companies and supporters to get reelected. And the reality is, this is not going to be easy to tackle. The challenge is that you'll get ethical politicians who say, I'm not going to take any of that money, and I'm going to try to do the right thing. And right now, the way the system is set up, there's a good chance those politicians won't get reelected. And instead, their opponents, who were more than happy to take millions of dollars in campaign contributions, will get reelected, and then they will return the favor to their noble campaign donors. We are at a crossroads. We have to decide who are the constituents of the American government. Is it industry, or is it the American people?
Right now, it's pretty clear that our government is serving industry. This podcast, by accident, because I wasn't expecting this, but this podcast has turned into a 12-year documentary about our government serving industry instead of the public. And Callie Means, while he is clearly trying to repent for his sins, for years, Callie Means made money by helping industry corrupt our government. But here's what he's saying now that he's had his come to Jesus.
Why is the FDA funded by the pharmaceutical industry? I've spoken to member after member who are very concerned about that in this building, but they slide it in. Why is pharma lobbying to pay billions of dollars out of pocket to fund their own regulatory agency? I've talked to healthcare staffers who support this for whatever reason and said, oh, it's a money saver. It's $3 billion. $3 billion, as if this building cares about $3 billion. That's $3 billion that we could have the taxpayer pay to not allow the agency that regulates drugs to be co-opted by the agency, by the industry that's trying to regulate. That would be $3 billion well spent. The FDA should not be funded by the pharmaceutical industry. I've been in DC long enough to know that institutions are built to grow, and if the incentives of a bureaucracy is to grow as the pharmaceutical industry grows, and there's zero conflicts of interest rules about the FDA commissioner going straight to the board of Pfizer, it creates really bad incentives. We have to just untangle the FDA from the pharmaceutical industry. And number two, we need to disaggregate the F and the D. Why is the pharmaceutical industry funding the institution that oversees our food? We need to do these simple things. One other is SNAP. It is absolutely suicidal public policy that with the program that lower-income Americans depend on for supplemental nutrition, that 10% of that goes to sugary drinks and 70% goes to ultra-processed food. We are underwriting the poisoning of our lower-income population, and then Medicaid picks up as a lifetime annuity to pharma. We are spending more on mitochondrial dysfunction, diabetes, and related conditions just on Medicaid than the entire U.S. defense budget is going to bankrupt our country. It's destroying our human capital. It's not working. We should not be subsidizing ultra-processed food for children. The last, and just on this corruption, very importantly, is that the pharmaceutical industry is able to buy off our information sources. We are the only country essentially in the world that allows that. During COVID, there was zero curiosity about why we were dying at a 3 times higher rate than any other country. When you listen to independent media, all they're talking about is the exploding rates of chronic conditions. There is never a segment. CNN, NBC, Today Show, they will not have my sister and I on. We have a book about medical empowerment. They won't have any healthcare author on that even questions medical orthodoxy. I've talked to the producers. They said, no fly zone, because it would go against who's paying their bill. It is not liberal, it's not conservative to say that we should not have an institution that just fundamentally profits from Americans being sick, being able to buy off our information sources.
FDA commissioner straight to the board of Pfizer. FYI, he's talking about Scott Gottlieb. That's a real example. Scott Gottlieb was a board member of multiple pharmaceutical companies who Donald Trump then appointed as the FDA commissioner, who upon leaving went straight to the board of Pfizer. Which is what makes this RFK Jr. pick for Health and Human Services feel so weird, in a good way. Because the first Trump administration was a story of complete corporate capture of our government. Industries were permitted to run wild in pursuit of profit during the first Trump administration. Foxes guarding all the hen houses. So like, for example, reckless banker Steven Mnuchin became the Secretary of the Treasury. The ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson became our Secretary of State. And the Koch brothers Congressman Mike Pompeo became the CIA Director and Secretary of State. And the fossil fuel industry, once again, is poised to be put in charge of regulating itself if Chris Wright, the founder and CEO of fracking company Liberty Energy, becomes the Secretary of Energy. But for political reasons, because Trump wanted him to drop out of the presidential race and endorse him instead, for those political reasons, RFK Jr. might be empowered to act on what he's been advocating for, which in part is to reverse corporate capture in our health departments and in Congress. Just listen to this guy.
Money from the healthcare industry has compromised our regulatory agencies and to this body as well. The reality is that many congressional healthcare staffers are worried about impressing their future bosses at pharmaceutical companies rather than doing the right thing for American children. Today, over 100 members of Congress support a bill to fund Ozempic with Medicare at $1,500 a month. Most of these members have taken money from the manufacturer of that product, a European company called Novo Nordisk. As everyone knows, once a drug is approved for Medicare, it goes to Medicaid. And there's a push to recommend Ozempic for Americans as young as 6 over a condition, obesity, that is completely preventable and barely even existed 100 years ago. Since 74% of Americans are obese, the cost of all of them, if they take their Ozempic prescriptions, will be $3 trillion a year. This is a drug that has made Novo Nordisk the biggest company in Europe. It's a Danish company, but the Danish government does not recommend it. It recommends a change in diet to treat obesity and exercise. Virtually Novo Nordisk's entire value is based upon its projections of what Ozempic is going to sell to Americans. For half the price of Ozempic, we could purchase regeneratively raised organic agriculture, organic food for every American, 3 meals a day, and gym membership for every obese American. Why are members of Congress doing the bidding of this Danish company instead of standing up for American farmers and children?
RFK Jr. is saying a bunch of things that members of Congress and administrations of both parties don't generally say. Maybe that's why they hate him so much. But this appointment, dare I say, I'm actually optimistic about it? And I know I shouldn't be optimistic about anything. I know I'm setting myself up for disappointment, but listen to the guy.
The good news is that we can change all this, and we can change it very, very, very quickly. And it starts with taking a sledgehammer to corruption, to the conflicts in our regulatory agency and in this building. These conflicts have transformed our regulatory agencies into predators against the American people, and particularly our children. 80% of NIH grants go to people who have conflicts of interest, and these scientists are allowed to collect royalties of $150,000 a year on the products that they develop at NIH and then farm out to the pharmaceutical industry. The FDA, the USDA, and the CDC are all controlled by giant for-profit corporations. Their function is no longer to improve and protect the health of Americans. Their function is to advance the mercantile and commercial interests of the pharmaceutical industry that has transformed them, and the food industry that has transformed them into sock puppets of the industry they're supposed to regulate. 75% of FDA funding does not come from taxpayers. It comes from pharma. And pharma executives and consultants and lobbyists cycle in and out of these agencies.
And Donald Trump seems poised to put him in a position to stop that. But the reaction to this selection of RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services Secretary has been largely different from mine, at least in the media I've been seeing. Because the smear campaigns against RFK Jr. have really worked, especially with people who align with the Democratic Party, who don't seem capable of writing his name without putting the word anti-vaxxer before it or inferring that he's a total quack. And let me just take a beat and just say that when it comes to vaccines, like I said earlier, I don't know. I took the COVID vaccine and I got a booster and I'm fine. And I don't personally know anyone who is anything other than fine after taking any vaccine. I don't fear vaccines, but I also don't know much about them. This isn't an issue that I'm knowledgeable about or care about all that much, to be honest. I'm vaccinated, but my decisions were based on trust in the medical system. And now, quite frankly, I know that I didn't know too much about that either. And the more I learn about our medical system's subservience to industry, the less I trust it. And I do think that skepticism in the testing being done by our government to ensure our safety is warranted for all kinds of products, medical and otherwise. And so when it comes to vaccines, I do know people who don't trust them. They don't trust that they are studied enough for safety, they don't trust the additives, and they don't trust that the recommended number of them, particularly for young children, are necessary. By putting someone branded as a vaccine skeptic in charge of regulating vaccines, we are likely to see additional tax dollars spent on researching their safety and necessity. But is that really a bad thing? And when it comes to RFK Jr. and vaccines, are you really sure that you, one, know what his positions really are on the subject? Like, have you formed your opinion about him based on the words that have been croaked out of his mouth or from what you've heard about him? And two, are you sure that he's wrong about all of his concerns? Like, don't we want our regulators to be skeptical of industry? Isn't that their job? Or do we want the vaccine police to rubber stamp vaccine safety certifications and to rubber stamp food additive certifications, as we have confirmed today they are actually doing? Consumer safety, food safety in particular. This used to be something Democrats cared about. Michelle Obama, First Lady, we all love her. Michelle Obama made healthy food and habits her First Lady cause. And industry hacks and Republicans gave her all kinds of hell for it. But times, they are a-changing.
I spent kind of 40 years in this space, and for most of that time, the Democratic Party was the party that was fighting this issue. And today, it's been a complete inversion. It's now the Republican Party generally. And I would say the appeal that I would make to Americans is that there's no such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. And
that's true. And I don't know why the Republicans are at least saying they want to take on the industries that are profiting from making us and keeping us sick, but I welcome it. And I wish the Democrats and their media toadies would welcome it too. This feels like it could be an opportunity for positive change. This feels like we might be able to pull a fast one on the corporate servants. This feels like a possible public serving mole might be weaseling his way into the corporatocracy. A fox in their henhouse for a change. If the Democrats don't ruin it with snark out of spite. Because by some miracle, MAGA is sub-branding itself right now with MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. And the former pharmaceutical and food industry lobbyist even has some talking points lined up to help Republicans deal with the cognitive dissonance of their new position. Here's Callie Means.
Senator, can I just say one thing as Jason and Vonnie were talking, it brought me back to working for the food industry. We used to pay conservative lobbyists to go to every office and say that it was the nanny state to regulate food. And I think that's as a conservative myself, something that's resonated. I just cannot stress enough that as we're hopefully learning today, the food industry has rigged our systems beyond recognition. And addressing a rigged market is not an attack on the free market. It is a necessity for a free market to take this corruption out. So I just want to say that.
Great. Run with that, Republicans. Let's look at this in terms of what's in our best interests. Our as in, as a human, our best interests. Because I don't care about the hypocrisy of this Republican Party flip-flop as long as the poisons are removed from my food. I want the poisons removed from my food. We should encourage ideas that would benefit us, even if they are coming from people we have doubts about, and even if it requires forgiving positions they held in the past. Because the past is past. What matters now is the future. And what's possible if we stop hysterically resisting and try cooperating where agreement can be found. That's what RFK Jr. decided to try when the Democrats kicked him out of the party for daring to want to run in a primary. And his political agreement with Trump does seem to be turning into an opportunity for power to make real change. Because remember, we're talking about Donald Trump here. Donald Trump doesn't have policy goals. This is always all about him. Everything's all about him. He's just ego. He's desperate to be loved. And we got really, unless you're rich, you got a tax cut. But for most of us who work for a living, we got nothing from 4 years of hysteria and resistance and witch hunts. The first Trump term was awful. But part of that awful was the reaction to his presidency that started before he even had a chance to do anything as president. RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, both Democrats, are right now poised to be empowered by trying a different strategy. And perhaps we should look to their success and take notes for Trump season 2. Because this is not what I was expecting to hear from a Trump appointee.
As an environmental activist and attorney, it was obvious to me very early on, and whenever you see the commoditization of the environment, of human beings, that there's always a subversion of democracy that is coterminous. And that's what we've seen. We've seen all of these institutions, the media, the health agencies, the agricultural agencies, the American press, the medical system, twisted to turn against their fundamental mission. And our country is supposed to be the exemplary nation in the world. If a foreign nation did this to our country, we would consider an act of war. It is un-American. These companies have been allowed, through the profit motive, to destroy everything that we value in America. And this is not just economic warfare. It's not just chemical warfare. We're all involved in spiritual warfare. And we have to understand that. And the core people who are here today, the leaders who have convened this, the leaders from all of these different groups, from the medical profession, from healthy foods, all of these advocates and the political leaders have all given us a reason for hope. And they're leading a battle for the heart, for the soul of our country. And it's a spiritual battle, and that's something we all need to understand. The American Revolution started with a very, very small core of activists who were able to articulate these new set of values, and they did something that nobody in the world could believe. A ragtag group of people brought to its knees the greatest empire in the history of mankind. We can take our country back from these industries, and we can restore not only our democracy and the integrity of it, most important of all, we can begin restoring our children's health.
Sounds great to me. And I do understand that these are just words, and I am skeptical about how much he can actually accomplish. You know, he's vowing to take on some of the most powerful industries in the world in an administration that in its first run was totally subservient to the most powerful industries in the world. But RFK is poised to get in, and he did it with a political deal with a guy who's manipulatable. I see potential here. I see a possible silver lining in the return of Trump's chaos. But I do see the headwinds against RFK Jr. here. Even if he gets past the media storm that is still raging against him and gets past the Senate Democrats and gets confirmed, there are powerful forces waiting to fight him even when he's on the inside. And so I know we can't put all our hopes in RFK Jr. There's plenty of reasons not to, even if there are also reasons for hope. And so I want to end this episode with this testimony, which gives some real-world examples of success fighting these industries without the assistance of government at all. Now, obviously, this is more of a whack-a-mole approach, and an overhaul of our healthcare system is needed. But in case the headwinds against progress blow too hard against RFK Jr., here are some strategies we can look to in the meantime. Here's Jason Karp, the guy whose incurable illnesses were cured when he changed his diet.
Having studied all these public companies and knowing that a significant part of how we got here is actually from these public companies, what I can tell you is that they're all relatively low growth rate companies, but they have grown their earnings every single year, pretty much. And because they're low growth rate companies, they react extremely quickly to when their earnings start to decline. This is just one way of saying that you as consumers have a lot more power than you realize. Most of what we talked about today were top-down solutions of how we can work with government to help. But the fastest way to help is if consumers start boycotting with their wallet. I say this without exaggeration, that if any one of these public companies mentioned today, or any of the large companies that you know of, the big food companies, if they had just a 5% drop, just 5 in sales, if you had all of you here, or hopefully there's some very, very, very large influencers listening, or celebrities, if any one of those people came out and said, do not buy U.S. Kellogg cereal until they put in the same ingredients that they sell abroad, and that caused sales to decline by 5%, just 5, in 1 quarter, they would change this overnight.
And here's food activist, food babe Vani Hari with some real-world examples of how she made those financial calculations work in our favor with efforts that she led along with her 2 million followers.
We use over 10,000 food additives here in the United States, and in Europe, there's only 400 approved. In 2013, I discovered that Kraft was producing their famous mac and cheese in other countries without artificial dyes. They used yellow 5 and yellow 6 here. I was so outraged by this unethical practice that I decided to do something about it. I launched a petition asking Kraft to remove artificial dyes from their products here in the United States. And after 400,000 signatures and a trip to their headquarters, Kraft finally announced they would make the change. I also discovered Subway was selling sandwiches with the chemical called azodicarbonamide in their bread in other countries. This is the same chemical they use in yoga mats and shoe rubber. You know when you turn a yoga mat sideways and you see the evenly dispersed air bubbles? Well, they wanted to do the same thing in bread, so it would be the same exact product every time you went to a Subway. When the chemical is heated, studies show that it turns into a carcinogen. Not only is this ingredient banned in Europe and Australia, you get fined $450,000 if you caught using it in Singapore. If we were able to get, when this, what's really interesting is when this chemical is heated, studies show that it turns into a carcinogen. Not only is this ingredient banned, but we were able to get Subway to remove azodicarbonamide from their bread in the United States after another successful petition. And as a bonus, there was a ripple effect, and almost every bread manufacturer in America followed suit. For years, Starbucks didn't publish their ingredients for their coffee drinks. It was a mystery until I convinced a barista to show me the ingredients on the back of the bottles they were using to make menu items like their famous pumpkin spice lattes. I found out here in the United States, Starbucks was coloring their PSLs with caramel coloring level 4, an ingredient made from ammonia and linked to cancer, but using beta-carotene from carrots to color their drinks in the UK. After publishing an investigation and widespread media attention, Starbucks removed caramel coloring from all of their drinks in America and started publishing the ingredients for their entire menu. I want to make an important point here. Ordinary people who rallied for safer food, shared this information, and signed petitions were able to make these changes. We did this on our own. But isn't this something that the people in Washington, our elected politicians, should be doing?
Obviously, the answer is yes. And I just hope that Democrats aren't so blinded by hatred for Donald Trump that they piss this opportunity away. Democratic Party royalty has weaseled its way into the Trump administration and is promising actions that are so obviously good for everyone, to the point that they were supported by Democrats for a very long time. This should be the easiest effort in the world to support. I'm sick of the resistance. It accomplished nothing. I think the time has come to try assistance. I think it's time to try to work with the greatest orange who has ever lived. Tell him he's pretty and smart and has the best ideas. And then tell him what those ideas are, like get the poisons out of our food. I think RFK Jr. is on to something here. And I hope we get to see what else he can accomplish as the leader of the assistants. And this is a story that I'm genuinely excited to watch. And so, stay tuned. Okay, so I'm going to bury this at the very end of the episode because it feels a little dirty because of our business model, but I don't think it should feel dirty because no one's paying me to do this. I don't know, whatever. I told you before that I'm a very happy patient at Ways to Well, right? I love the fact that I now know what bun is on my blood test. And I do have to tell you that I have been on these supplements now for a month that they recommended. I knew I was very vitamin D deficient, but for the first time, they actually told me how much vitamin D to supplement with. And there's a couple others. I think I'm taking maybe 7 total pills a day. It's really not much. And my Brazil nuts. But I have never felt healthier. I feel like I am mentally quicker, to the point that Andrew Heaton, he is the sweetest person in the world, but he actually sent me a message today telling me that I was on my game today on We're Not Wrong, which was so nice of him. But yeah, people are noticing that I am sharper. And I am one of them. I feel like I'm sharper. My hair has stopped falling out. I feel like I'm waking up easier in the morning. Like everything is just getting better. And I do think it's because Ways to Well is helping me. Oh, and I've lost 4 pounds. So that's fun. But yeah, I'm a very happy customer. And I do recommend, even though it's out of pocket, like I said, like this was better than any doctor's appointment I've ever had. I'm so happy to be in their hands. And so I will tell you that they have a referral code that they give to patients that we can give to other people. And the way this works is if you use my referral code, you get 10% off, and then I get a discount on my future Ways to Well appointments. So I don't know. I don't know if this counts as advertising because I have to be a patient to even offer it to you, and Ways to Well doesn't know I'm doing it. I don't know. But I just figure this has been really healthy for me. And if you're interested, it's kind of a win-win situation. You save money, I save money, so I might as well tell you about it. And so my referral code is in this episode's show notes for you if you're interested in trying out the Ways to Well thing. And just so you know, like how I'm kind of thinking of doing this, I'm thinking I'm going to do Ways to Well once per year. And then I'll still get my blood tests through my insurance, through my doctors, and kind of monitor my blood tests in between my Ways to Well appointments. So it's like, that's how I'm looking to afford it. So it would be $500 a year for me, which I can afford, especially because I quit drinking and I have some money. Like basically what I said is all the money that I no longer spend on drinking, I spend on health. And so that's where I found the space in my budget for this. And like I said, it was wonderful. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. I am off to Hawaii for Thanksgiving. I am going to be completely checking out. I am still doing We're Not Wrong, but I will be very hard to reach. And I'm quite excited about that. And then Claire and I have more hearings on deck for December. I will tell you what's going on in Congress real quick. Congress is back in session. They only came back in session between the election and Thanksgiving for a week, so they got exactly nothing important done. The Democrats are trying to get more judges confirmed in the Senate, but the Republicans, predictably, are throwing up all the roadblocks that they possibly can. Over in the House, they're not doing jack shit before Thanksgiving. And so when they get back in December, there's a lot that needs to be done. They have to do the defense authorization. That actually has to be done this year. That is a must-pass piece of legislation. That's the only true must-pass piece of legislation. Then there's also the Farm Bill and government funding. Both of those can be kicked into the next Congress. My crystal ball says that they will be, especially the government funding. There's supposed to be 12 bills that are done. There's just no signs that that's happening. And the Farm Bill, if there's going to be a surprise, it's going to be the Farm Bill because they've been working on that for a while and just have been struggling with inner Republican Party nonsense. That one could pop up. I don't expect it to. But December, we're just going to have to do a lot of waiting and seeing. But the government funding has to be done by December 20th, and the defense authorization has to be done by the end of December. And then the new Congress is inaugurated right after New Year's. So that's where we're at for the lame duck. All right. Thanks for listening. I will be back in December. Got some hearings for you, including one about UFOs. But there's some more serious ones that I watched too. So yeah. But happy Thanksgiving. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.